we're talking electroculture today. Before we get into that, though, you make your living farming. You do that as a vegetable farmer. So, how did you get started farming? And then we can tie that into the electroculture side a little later.
Okay. I've always had an interest in agriculture, but I grew up in an extremely urban environment. Like East Nashville is this, it's a pretty gentrified neighborhood at this point, but it was just a very urban environment. There was no gardening. There was no community gardens really at the time. Nothing like that. I didn't have any exposure, but I had interest. I was exposed to some small farms by being fortunate enough to spend quite a bit of time in the Caribbean as a young person. And some friends of mine's father down there took me to a hillside garden, a small farm, we would call it. Um, I had kind of grown up with the concept of big, vast farms, just being from the South, even though I really hadn't seen that many. That's just my concept. So I see this small farm, very diverse, very different from what I knew, end up helping him carry water and all these types of things on this small farm, this small piece of land for different months at a time that I would spend in this location over some years. Became close in this community, end up living up in a tent in it's a community called Bunkers Hill in Jamaica, in Trelawney Parish. And very nice community, fortunate to spend time there and was exposed to what I become to know is what I kind of saw as real farming, real agriculture. So that was kind of my first glimpse. After some time there, I traveled all around the world for many years by invitation of people that I would meet. Had a very interesting time, kind of a vagabond. Spent a lot of time in the Netherlands. Had some very educational experiences there. Did some work in ethnomechanical medicines. Very diverse array of experiences. Um, Came back to Tennessee in 2001 and ended up meeting who's now my wife. We moved actually first to California together because I had a lot of friends that I knew from a community here in Tennessee called the Farm Community in Summertown, Tennessee, and a lot of them had moved out west. So, being young, adventurous people, we moved out there and spent about close to 10 years out there, agricultural experiences of many varieties. My wife interned briefly on a small farm there, learned a lot of things. But we really didn't know that much. We had our son in 2009, and really out of wanting to raise him in a specific way, even though we had little experience and not any really capital or money to do it, we knew that our priority was in the environment in which we wanted our son to be with us. We wanted him to be spending a lot of time outside, having those opportunities in nature to interface, and maybe having a lot of the things we didn't in that way. So we go ahead.
Would you say you went in then to agriculture pretty open-minded?
Blindly, even not from ignorance, but of reality of what it would be, of what it would mean. I really wasn't an idealist with it either. I had spent enough time around agriculture. I knew it was difficult. I knew it was labor intensive. I knew these things, but I had no idea really what it was going to take to make a living selling vegetables. That's a whole thing. And just selling vegetables. That's all we've done for the last almost 12 years. We don't have any other work.
So you're
There
doing
was
this
a lot of,
full time. It's your
yes, sir.
career. It
Yes,
supports
sir.
your family.
Yes, sir.
At what point in time does the concept of electroculture, which I'll define here just for people listening to this, and
Sure.
you can get way more into this than me because
No,
you're the
please,
expert on
please
this.
go ahead.
So electroculture, sometimes known as magnetoculture, simply put, is the agricultural utilization of feeble voltage to stimulate an electromagnetic action in the soil. So that's off your website,
Sure.
thefertilecurrent.com, which people can
Mhm.
check out.
Yes, thank you.
Take me to the time when this concept first crosses paths with you.
Early on, very early on in my vegetable farming days, way before I was ready for it. I found it in some readings. I'm pretty expansive with the stuff I like to read. I came across some early French writings regarding growing grasses, high protein grasses, different. I was just really searching for my avenue. Even though we were growing vegetables, I still didn't know that was what we were definitely going to do at first. I thought maybe I might try growing hops here in the South. I had all kind of little and ideas of what we might do, niche markets. But through and through, I realized like I'm an annual vegetable grower. That's what really I know how. That's where I really was. That's what we really interfaced with the best, and we're able to make a living doing. So early on, I come across these concepts of utilizing telluric currents, earth currents, um, and the currents between the cosmic energies and the earth, the positive and negatives, that could be harnessed to grow bigger, better crops, all the kind of generalities. Did not understand how that worked. It resonated truth with me deeply, but I didn't understand it. Years passed, the first 5, 6 years of the vegetable farm are so hard. We had no capital. We don't have any exterior support. We had no other income. The economy was going through its phases, which whatever, I won't even blame anything on that. Most of it's also a lot of personal discipline that you have to learn. You have to learn what you can and cannot do for your health, the things that you need to be doing to keep your energy levels optimal. A lot of it's an inward journey beyond just learning how to do the farm work in an efficient, um, lucrative, high yield scenario. So these concepts were swirling around in my mind the whole time. I even came across a farm early on that was rating its produce values in angstroms and energy units,
Hmm.
biophotonic energy units. And that really resonated with me. I was like, that is what I want to do. Like I can't just like, you know, it's not all about just producing this product and then getting $1 for it. Like that can't be it for me. And it kind of was though, for like the first 5 or 6 years, just scrambling to get back to a place where I could expand again. I was always very expansive, and then this first 5 or 6 years really narrowed my focus into trying to make it as a vegetable farmer, sell enough stuff, produce really high quality produce. We sell to really high end restaurants in a competitive market, but we also demand more for our product
So,
because
so in those first few days when you're doing that, trying to produce that premium product,
mhm,
is electroculture? It's not in the picture. It's only like it's the seed's been planted in your mind, but you're
just
not
swirling around in my
implementing.
brain.
Yeah.
I'm not doing anything about it. No,
Okay.
it's just there as far as exposure. So we jump to some years later, let's say this is around 2017, I had been training Kung Fu for some time. I've been into traditional Chinese medicine and Qigong medicine and Qigong practice for myself and for my martial arts for some time, but on a pretty rudimentary level. And I had always wanted to go much further with it. I almost went to Paul Pitchford's school in California back in the day. And when I was finally ready to do it, the school closed, kind of regretted that moment. So I had the inclination. The farm was starting to do better. Our sales were better. The economy was picking up. The restaurants were buying more. I had a moment where I felt like, okay, maybe it's an expansive moment. So I enrolled in medical Qigong training, which is a multi-year long event with Dr. James Michael Wood, who passed away last year, but was a brilliant, brilliant teacher and one of my personal mentors. And I trained with him in a small group for a couple of years, and got my credentials and went through all the training for medical qigong practitioner, treating patients here on the farm when I could, as a passion. And if you're familiar with medical qigong at all, I'm not sure, but inherently the principles are the principles of life. And in this training is when electroculture makes sense. I was in class one night. The classes were at night, so I was farming all day and then driving about an hour and a half from where I live, which is out in the country, to deep within Nashville to go to these classes. There till 10:30 p.m. or so. Drive back. You know what I mean?
Putting
So
in the
I'm
time.
yeah, putting in the time and loving it. um, Feeling like I was finally finding myself again, where I had gotten away from that in my first years of farming. Everything was starting to make sense. Not everything, but many things. And one of those things, one night I'm sitting in class and we're talking about creating our chi field, our Wei chi field, where you collect energy from, we call it heaven and earth in medical Qigong, which is just cosmic solar energy from the solar winds and the earthly negative energy. And we combine those within ourselves into our elixir fields. And when the amplitudes are balanced, basically, and they're both in plentiful supply, then this field starts to expand from within you, expanding outward. And that what we would call the Wei Qi field. It's an outward field of energy. Being electromagnetic beings, that's why oxygen is attracted to the earth and to us, is because it's paramagnetic. It's attracted to this magnetic source. So I learned a lot about breath work, trauma, organ balancing, all the medical qigong stuff. It's very expansive, but at its essence, you're producing electricity in the body. This electricity kills disease, heals trauma, because you can vectorize these energies. When you're producing, it's what would be known as like scalar energy. It's in all directions infinitely at the same time. But through your intentions and through your mind, which would be like a frequency generator in radionics, you can vectorize this energy into specific places in the body to heal or to restore. This is a skill. It's not medical qigong. We're not healers. We are skillful practitioners that practice this skill. We can teach it and practice it. It's a very pragmatic. And if you know anything about Chinese culture in general, it's a very pragmatic culture. It's not a culture that, as metaphysical as it may seem, at its core, it's pragmatic. And that's electroculture. It is not a metaphysical endeavor of occult sciences. It is a way to produce. I mean, I've recently been jokingly using the term violent abundance is what we see on this little farm. It's insane. If you're going to use these systems, have your sales channels ready. We overproduce. We're growing less and less every year, less crops, less rows, less seed, getting higher yields than the previous year every year as we add more and more lines and create soil with high capacitance. So these are harmonious practices.
So zooming out, the earth has a magnetic field. There's all sorts of energy out there running through the atmosphere and through everything. Produce some of it, I guess, from biological beings. Some of it is coming from, like, obviously, like the moon has an energy, right? Like that's gravitational energy it's exerting on the planet. So there's these forces. So before we get into the electroculture side, can you talk a little bit about the free energy that's out there that we're all like, I'm breathing it in right now, you are, like, it's all around us?
Well, if you mean from more of a metaphysical, well, Chinese medicine perspective, like chi energy, then yeah, this is everything. Like, this is the Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians. This is the divine consciousness. But if you're speaking more like producing electricity, like Tesla free electricity type stuff, I guess we're talking more like free electrons from the atmosphere, which, I guess we're dealing with the troposphere, more specifically this low. The higher you go, the more of those there are. And if you think of those as just unpaired positive ions that have unpaired with the ground's negative, it's like when you shock something, that's an unpaired electricity that's causing a spark gap, right, between you and something that's ungrounded or grounded, depending on the charge. So the antennas, if you're speaking of how do they work in electroculture antennas.
Well, let's hold that, yeah, because I want to work up to that. I'm feeling my way through this, so it might be we might have
maybe we could think of it like this: the Earth is magnetic, like an ocean that's just ever present. The sun is electric, and it creates like the male component. And the Earth is the female ocean of ever-present magnetism. And between them, they create waves. And those waves are just everything. They manifest as the myriad of creation, depending upon their density and elemental interaction. Um,
Is
there's
there
a
is there an analogy or an analog for how plants in nature would, maybe harvest isn't the right word, maybe you have a better word, utilize this energy?
sure cation exchange capacity. The potential productivity of soil is basically gauged by its potential to exchange those cations with its negative. I mean, that's why people add lime. A lot of people don't know that's why they add lime. A lot of the old time farmers that live around here, they'll tell you lime's as good as adding fertilizer. Well, they're adding inert lime from a bag or a big load on a dump truck. Um, that's kind of a static product. It has its effect. You might notice that effect more imparts hydrogen than a cation exchange potential. But when you add, let's say, basalt, paramagnetic rock, to compost and you put that in the soil, that goes through a flux. And that creates an electrical charged lime, nascent lime, newly birthed lime. That's a whole different game. That's a whole different quality of energy. So this electricity is catalyzing the transmutation of elements. Elements are not static. They do not remain the same. You can't take a soil test and know what the soil is really like other than at that one moment. Just like a blood test. That's that one little moment that everything interacts constantly. Like who is it? The Jean Baptista Helmont, Van Helmont, the father of like pneumatic sciences. He coined the term gas. And he had theories that the gases arising from the bottoms of swamps from decomposing carbon-based life forms basically created this imprintable form of carbon in a gas that when it rose up through the waters, it interfaced with different heat, cooling elements, other elements, mostly metals, soils in the water, whatever it's interacting with would then discern what that imprintable carbon became. And that's also very similar to scalar science when we're talking about when we create this flux of negative and positive, we can induce intention into that. And that's more like in the internal medicine side. But in the agricultural side, you're transmuting elements in the soil. I mean, you're manufacturing the effect of lightning. We know how benevolent that is.
So electroculture, I'm going to give you two definitions of that. The first, the definition you'd tell a 10-year-old, you explain it to them. What is it?
Harnessing telluric and earth electrical currents to grow crops that are more resistant to pest, disease, and have higher yields. I don't know if that's simple enough, but
Okay. And then going to someone who's older, but they're big into gardening or market gardening, how would you define it to them?
I mean, you could look at it through Faraday's first law of electromagnetic induction. When you have magnets interfacing with a conductor, voltage is induced. Electroculture is, I guess, a broader term of the utilization of these principles. The antenna heads produce electricity in a myriad of ways, not just through electromagnetic induction. That just might be their primary, because you have the positive cations being collected by the aerial antennas, and then you have that at the negative point you have the anions, the negatively charged ions, and when those flux through the wire, they create voltage. And that voltage has the effect of transmuting elements, fixing nitrogen. I mean, it fixes ammonias into nitrogen that are usable. So then you have plants that aren't biocapacitating, accumulating too much ammonia in the soil. They put that ammonia buildup out through the leaves as infrared light. And that's what a lot of the bad insects come for. That's their signal of weak plants. So then they don't come for the plants. And then the collateral damage of them spreading all the soil-borne disease up from the soil when they're crawling around isn't there. So you have kind of this manifold of benefits that just keeps on stacking. And on top of it, yields are staggering. I mean, it's I can only suggest people try it, because as a farmer, it's like when you go from seeing, you know, let's say just for a real vague idea, like 8 rows of something, and then you start seeing those 8 rows produce 20 times what you were getting. So you cut down to 4 rows, and you add some more lines, and you get what you got the previous year again, and you keep cutting your planting down in half, and you keep getting more yield. That's all I know for a fact just from doing it for years. I practiced this for some years before. I'm pretty averse in my private life until this point. I've been in the shadows doing my work. I'm not really typically one to make videos or to put it out there, but I realized that it was inhibiting me from fulfilling parts of my dharma that were critical. So I chose to go beyond my comfort levels, put myself out there, put my work out there, and here we are.
Yeah. And I think that's powerful. I mean, I think that just that's a good life lesson for a lot of people right there. And, people can say whatever they want to say about this, but I think the biggest danger in anything is blind dismissal of like,
Mhm.
that's whatever, woo woo, versus I think there's a lot of stuff that people in history have known that's been lost as we've gone and kind of got a little more reductionist in thinking
Sure.
and scaled up with technology and
Mm.
things. So we've lost, it's what can a circuit board do, or what can a more efficient means of production do, versus maybe, it's like that what if question. What if ancient farmers knew more about these things than we do today, or ancient other cultures?
Sure.
And we just write it off as like, hey, whatever, put some fertilizer on it, get the
Yeah.
tractor out
Hmm.
there. That's how you make yields. And we just blow that off. And then those cultures age, die off. And that a lot of times that information goes by the wayside. So I think these conversations are important. So when you had that seed planted, you're going through the classes. At what point do you decide, all right, I'm going to make a go of this and I'm going to try and implement this on my farm? What did that look like?
Kind of a big move. Um, for probably 2 years, I just searched for equipment that I could buy that was comprehensive. I had studied the old books, Crystal Flu, anything I get
Well,
my
let me
hands
pause.
on.
When you look, because we kind of got into this in our DMs. When you go
Mhm.
back and you want to find information on this, how far back do you have to go to start getting information?
1700s. There's stuff from the 1700s. I have a name just to make sure I'm saying it correctly here. Justin Crystal Flu is kind of thought of as like, okay, that's the guy. He wrote the book, I think, in like 1892. Um, but you have like Andrew Cross before that, I think, in the UK. He was doing experiments with electricity on all kind of levels, but a lot of them were with plants, and they were recording extreme results. Interestingly enough, I mean, right now, if you Google like electroculture China, or for instance, the first thing you'll get, and these are coming from like the World Economic Forum sites, is how staggering the yields of China's crops are utilizing electroculture. Now they're using a real juiced up kind of wild version. It's not what I'm promoting. But then as you're reading all these reports and headlines of sensational yields, the verbiage used is very sensational of how big their yields are, right? Within that, you'll have little things pop up that say, little fact checker things. Is electroculture even real? And you click on it, it's like, these little quasi answers trying to kind of dismiss something amongst all the World Economic Forums telling you how amazing China's doing agriculturally. I'm not saying I believe everything I read, certainly not on the World Economic Forum or any media whatsoever, personally, but just as a contradiction of culture there. And as far as technology, I mean, I feel like the naturalists, quote unquote, as people see some people who may do some things like we do, have been intentionally dissuaded from understanding technology. I think we've been intentionally dissuaded as it being not part of our path or something, as to get it out of our control, because naturalists and agriculturalists are some of the most innovative people in history all throughout the world.
Well, it's interesting. You're saying the more mainstreaming of things that would have been crazy to see mainstream 20 years ago. I mean, cannabis is legal in I think like 40 states.
Almost
You're
all of them,
you're
yeah.
seeing psychedelics like ayahuasca and stuff become talked
Very
about,
talked about. Very
very
talked about.
talked about,
Yeah.
and these are things that ancient cultures used not necessarily for quantifiable things. It's not like I do this and then like, hey, I can run faster. It's like it connected me with my true self or something like that, right?
So in the
And
Netherlands in the late 90s, that's what we were working with. It was,
okay,
yeah.
and people, I think everybody has their own limits. Like some people are like, well, hey, I'm not going to take prescription drugs. I'll use I'll take ginger tablets or something, right, for seasickness versus Dramamine, or I'll take some sort of rub. So like we've all kind of set these limits of like, I think everybody has a little bit of that naturalist, um, pre pre pharmaceutical, pre technology like bend to them.
Yeah, I mean, it's trendy
But I think there's
in a good way.
yes,
I mean, in a good way.
there's also a bad one side of it too, but
Yeah,
in a
yeah,
good
for sure.
way. Yeah, and it's like people look to these things, and there's part belief, and there's part faith in like, hey, this is gonna work. And I always say this, I'm derailing us here,
No, it's good.
but to say that when people look at this, not to just immediately throw it out, it's like, hey, look at some other things maybe you do or believe in. And I mean, you could go as basic as like organic, right? Like, is organic food more nutrient rich? We can kind of debate that. I mean,
Sometimes not.
right. So the reason I originally got us off in the weeds is to say, hey, like this stuff was talked about 200-300 years ago.
Mhm.
There's not a ton of new information on it, correct?
I wouldn't say that that's necessarily true. I mean, the Great Britain had a department of electroculture as part of their Department of Agriculture. After World War II is when this was intentionally stifled to sell ammonium nitrate to farmers, leftover bomb materials. This is all part of the war machine.
Sure. Okay. So now going
This
back
is
to
not
that.
by this is not because people were like, no, we're not going to do that anymore. This was intentionally stifled and suppressed. Let's get that clear. Like it's not a matter of like people stopped doing it because it wouldn't work. I mean, we have all kind of things that are in that vein that we're realizing, oh no, all we need to do is that. And our, like you said, our forefathers, our ancestors knew that, you know. But we were tricked. The
Got it.
USDA is intentionally, when I first started farming, first couple of years, I wouldn't even disgrace my pickup truck by driving it into that parking lot of the USDA. But I decided finally that I was maybe being stubborn and I should apply for some greenhouse grants because I couldn't afford to buy them otherwise, right? So I go down there. The people there, the agents, extension agents, all super nice people. If I saw them right now, we'd have friendly conversations on the street. We're very kind toward one another. Let me preface that. However, I was told blatantly on the first visit to this office, just trying to apply for a greenhouse grant. That's all I was trying to do. And I was allowed to do that. But what I was really pushed by the extension agent within like 15 or 20 minutes was he told me verbatim, most of the farmers around here make more money standing up here filling out documents than they do farming. And he was insinuating that I should do the same, that I should play the crop insurance game and I should basically fail on purpose. And that's what's being pushed. That's what's being pushed on so many levels. The price of food, you have this subversive media who will tell you that like they'll push agendas like the price of organic food's too high. Well, the price of like early death is too high. Like there's a lot of cost variables we need to really consider before we talk about price. Like people won't bat an eye to spend like $15 on a cocktail, but God forbid if they spent that on a bag of carrots or something. You know what I mean? So what is it
Absolutely, yeah.
worth? And that's a choice. That's where your values lie. And that's not for me to decide for anyone but myself. But I also don't think it's a laudable claim.
I'm with you. So
Yeah.
if we go back to you scouring the internet, the world, hey, I need some devices to
Yeah.
help
Couldn't find
put this
comprehensive
in.
equipment.
Okay, so no equipment.
There is some equipment available by some people doing their best. And I have no, it just wasn't resonating as comprehensive as what I was understanding from all the old books. That's where I started. I started with old books. And I probably read them each 300 times before I even went looking for equipment to make sure I understood everything that was happening. And I would take each component of the system, each component of each antenna, and do weeks of research. Where did that component come from? Who's it named after? How'd they figure it out? What'd they use it for? What's it used for now? What's it been used for historically? Where do those minerals come from? All these things, every little detail, writing all this down for many times, for a year or two at this point on this one detail, trying to figure the equipment out because I really couldn't find equipment that had all the features. Just some very simple, like atmospheric electrical collection rods and wire arrays and stuff that's on some of my equipment, but it just wasn't enough. There was no thermocouples. There was no magnetic core. There was all these features that I understood were integral to the original devices, and I was just looking for equipment more like that. That
What
made
year
sense
was
to me.
this?
This was when I was really starting to look for equipment was 2017, 2016,
Okay, so we're
probably
like
2016.
6, 7 years into this. So you're looking, you can't find it. So is the decision then, hey, I got to build it?
Well, not at first. I kind of am like, man, I guess I'll get some of this other stuff. Even tried to buy a couple things there in from Europe, and it's like even the sites weren't even letting me buy. It was almost like the universe was saying, you're not getting anything from anybody else. Like it was just wasn't happening. I was trying to buy stuff. I was reaching out, and so some time went by, kind of quasi frustrated with that, but not in any major way. I started really getting into the paramagnetic rock and compost, high capacitance soil building because I knew that needed to be laid down fundamentally. And a lot of people in electroculture either aren't considering this heavily enough, in my opinion, or don't know to consider it. But you're putting energy into something, into the matrix of soil, and you need to create a battery out of that soil, a living battery. So by adding that paramagnetic phase, and basically that can be, in my case, I use basalt. Hybrix basalt's a very paramagnetic rock, and you can even measure that paramagnetism on a machine called a PCSM, which was invented by a gentleman named Philip Callahan, who's an American farmer, and in conjunction with a gentleman named Bob Pike, I believe, and his daughter still runs their labs, which is Pike Agri Labs. And you can view that machine on there, I believe. They are hard to get. They don't produce hardly any of them anymore, but they're still up on the site. So in our case, we have limestone bedrock. It's a very diamagnetic rock, which is meaning it's not inclined to magnetism. Diamagnetic. Paramagnetic means it is inclined to magnetism. So we're adding that, in the biodynamics world, we might call it like a cosmic rock. It has a yang energy, a male positive energy, electric energy. And even, I had read Emanuel Velikovsky's books on electrical geology years before this. And they all this book is talking about is how all the different rock formations of the world, rivers, all our geological features and anomalies were caused by very quick electrical spark gapping and generations between the Earth and the cosmos. And he has books. One of his books is Worlds in Collision, Earth in Upheaval. These are excellent books. Emanuel Velikovsky, Emmanuel with an I. And anyway, he talks about basalt being the basalt towers formations. I think they're in like the Southwest and the Utah region, and also up in like Vermont. There's a lot of basalt. Granite is also a very paramagnetic rock. Um, for instance, uh, talks about these rock formations being generated by mass electrical generations, and they just appear. And they recreate these formations in a lab with basically loose sand and electrical impulses. Um, you can watch a lot of videos about this. It's very interesting, electrical geology. Anyway, that came back into my mind too at this time. Oh, the basalt. Yeah, it's electrical rock. So when you add these basalt with humus, which is in the compost, the humus, is the organic matter of soils that's decayed sufficiently to have lost its identity. So basically, it's that degraded, imprintable carbon again. We're back to this imprintable carbon. Again and again, I'm seeing this kind of idea of birth from decay, spontaneous generations. Back in the day, they would, you had kind of a churchical dominated scientific community, and they would call it like, what was the word? Like abiogenesis, meaning kind of like you're saying that life came from nothing. But what they didn't understand, in my opinion, is that they just weren't looking at the right mother and father, because you have the energies of yin and yang. That's not nothing. They just manifest in many forms. Human beings is just one form that these energies manifest. Fire and water are another way. And when you combine fire and water, you make steam, and that's chi. The steam drives the train, not the fire or water alone, if that makes sense. So we're creating that energy in the soil with this negative and positive in the wire, which is the conductor. And it's
And
as simple as that.
is it, so there's that saying, right, in a lot of organic agriculture, feed the soil, not the plants. Is this the case that electroculture benefits the soil, the plants then benefit from that improved soil, or is the electroculture also affecting the plant?
I would say it's benefiting the soil, which is benefiting the plant, in my opinion of how it would work. I could see how you could see it otherwise, but in my personal view, I'm affecting the soil, which is affecting the plant.
The analog to that for
But it's a symbiosis. I mean, we can't separate the one from anything. We can't separate ultimately anything from anything
right,
being
right, because
all
the
one.
plants are
So,
feeding microbes in the soil, which then helps improve the soil
yeah,
and helps the plant, which feeds the
we're part of
soil.
that too.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so when that first device shows up,
nothing showed up. I made my first device.
okay, make your first device,
Yeah.
install it.
Mm-hmm.
When would you say you noticed something?
The next time that crop was planted, the results are drastically different. We've been watching the same crops in the same 1.5, 1 3/4 acres that we grow in. We grow in it year round, all the time, without rest. Our soil gets a lot of use. We take care of it, but I'm talking about the things a farmer notices that you can only notice as a farmer. And like I said when we were talking before, I make my living selling vegetables for my family, me and my wife and our son. We don't have employees. I make our deliveries to the restaurants myself. I wanted a very authentic experience with knowing my customers. I try to have as few customers as I can get away with while still selling what I need to sell. It's not a peripheral endeavor for me. I guess, like you're saying, the first time you try it, you don't really know. It's a faith move and a lot of research. I'm going to be honest. It really wasn't a move of faith. I was so confident in it that it didn't feel like a faith move. It felt like, okay, no, I've got to do this. I've been trying to do it for years. So I get my first device built. I'm pretty happy with it. I'm kind of like, I spent so much time learning the concepts of what I needed to do to build that first antenna that was comprehensive and had all the features, and then some also proprietary features of mine that I'm super happy with, just on a personal level. Like, I was just stoked, to like have something that I could now utilize for a system that is what I do for a living, that our family depends on, right? So I install the first system. Go
Let me
ahead.
pause you there. Was the first
Uh-huh.
antenna you made similar to the one that you have? I'm looking at your Instagram. It's you kind of
CW1.
holding it like this. It's like
Yes.
small, got a kind of corkscrew at the bottom with little
Are there
like
wires
finger
coming out the top?
wires at the top with one twisted wire with a ball on
Okay,
top.
that is actually my newest model, and that's called a petite. That's for houseplants, and it also connects to frequency generators for radionics induction of
All right.
elemental
So this is
nutrients.
yeah, this is CW4. Okay. So your first
That's
one was what?
exactly
CW
CW1.
CW1. Okay.
That's the
So
that's the main dude.
I'll get a picture of that one. We'll flash that up on
Thank you.
screen.
Thank you. So yeah, this one is kind of my first model. It's very similar to my prototypes, although I did change up a lot of little things. And I work very closely with an electrical engineer who was at first just installing a kiln originally years ago for my wife, who does pottery on the side as a hobby. And when he came to install, he starts looking around instantly, and his employee was like, "Oh man, he's gonna be hard to get to do any work." Because turns out what his real passion was gardening, farming. Actually, him and his wife have a small farm and sell a few staple crops to some local places. But he owns an electrical company, and before that, spent almost 45 years in industrial electrical systems. So his knowledge is vast, and he's also an avid organic gardener. So we had a lot to talk about. And we became friends, and he did the job for us. And I reached out a little while later. Actually, he reached out first and said, "Can I bring my wife? We want to do a tour." I said, "Sure, come on out." We hit it off. We ended up, he had no idea still about the electroculture. I hadn't even breached that. He was just into the gardening. So when he was here on the tour, I start showing him this, and you see his eyes just get wide. His whole world opened up, and he realized that his two knowledge bases were going to merge here. Got excited about that because that's a big thing for people. When you go off and you learn these things that are seemingly separate, and they merge into this synthesis of like beautiful work. And he very interested personally. Long story short, we form a relationship. I reach out. I'm like, "Come pick my stuff apart." He brings out these $7,000 meters of all sorts, resistance testers, all kind of testers I can't even explain. They're so advanced. And I had him go through my antenna designs, find the flaws, find the flaws in my installs. He helped me out a lot. Mostly what I learned through that experience was really a lot of insulatory tips on the installs. That was where I needed help at the time. So I got a lot of good data on that. Went through some details of electrical soldering that I was interested in refining. Man, just really picked everything apart. For the most part, they were solid, but I refined them with his help. He's since then like switched everything over to electroculture himself. I'm doing some installs with him this fall, making some antennas for him, some more stuff. But anyway, I was really like, come pick this apart. And we started talking about it. And I had already been thinking, I mean, this is electromagnetic induction at its core. There's a lot of factors going on, but at its core, because you have certain components of the antennas, like the thermocouple, that use what's known as the Seebeck effect. And when dissimilar metals of different temperatures interact, touch each other, and arc together, they create feeble voltage, 30 millivolts. That goes into the system every time the temperature is variant, like 10 degrees cooler or hotter. So you have those kind of other functions that are just directly producing feeble voltage, but at its core, it's electromagnetic induction. And I proposed that to him, and he thought for a minute, and he was like, "That's it. That's what
Okay.
you're doing. That's electromagnetic induction at its most just elegantly simple form."
And on these, I mean, they don't look too long. How tall is one from tip to 2 feet?
The antenna itself.
Yeah.
So the antenna body is based on all the measurements on these devices are based on the sacred cubit, so that the biogeometry of the device is just in a static position is harmonious. That's just a little bit of something that's a proprietary addition. None of the original antennas included that type of thought, but I wanted the intention and the thought on every single piece to have a function and a purpose. So the body of these antennas is half sacred cubit, which is 10.30 inches.
And then that
A little,
includes the little rods up top.
That's just the body. Then the rods extend to make the whole unit itself. I see what you're asking, is approximately 2 feet tall.
Okay. And then again, I'll put a picture up on the screen here for people who are watching this. At the bottom,
That's the lead wire
okay, lead wire. I was gonna
that
say,
you
oh, I
would
got
connect your ground wire to with a coupler.
okay. So that you wouldn't install this directly into the ground, would
No, that
you?
goes 25 feet up on a pole.
And then that so a wire runs off the bottom of that, and then the
Yep.
wire gets run
Runs
through the ground.
down, goes down the pole through ceramic insulators or other type of insulators, traditionally ceramic, and then into the ground about it's a varying depth between, let's say, 10 and 16 inches, depending on how deep your tillage is going to be. If your tillage is going to be at 10 inches, you're safe to put it at 12 or 14 inches. So you can kind of see what I mean. It's the
Got it.
depth. You just want it to be in the rhizome layer of your plants, basically.
So I'd say, okay, antenna relatively small. If you grew up in the
Yeah.
80s, you've seen the old school satellite antennas that
Oh,
are
oh
like 10
gosh.
feet
Yeah.
across, right? So
This
like
is nothing like that.
that's a satellite dish. This is
Yeah.
small. So how I say that because you have what I would visually say is a
Mm-hmm.
relatively small receiver.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, we look at our iPhone, right? Like there's no antenna there.
Yeah. 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 Size is not
Not necessarily an indicator of potence in many
right.
ways. Um, how big of an area could
Mm-hmm.
one of these cover?
Okay. That's easy to answer. Infinite distance south to north, because that's how you run the wire. You can run that wire if you had a 20 feet approximately east to west. These are all installed. The lines will always run south to north in these systems, regardless of if that's a diagonal line or if that's straight in line with your crops. They need to flow with the telluric current. Telluric current flows through air, land, water, concrete, everything.
And
The
that's
brass,
magnetic north.
magnetic south to magnetic north, exactly. Magnetic. Because in the old days, direction orientation is based off the term orient, which means east. And so you would determine your direction from the rising sun. So that's actually a variable condition. So we use magnetic north to south. That's correct. So you check it with a compass.
Does the soil have to be wet for this to be effective? I ask because, drier climates like I'm in here in Southern California. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you're not irrigating,
Mm-hmm.
the top layer of soil can just totally dry out. And,
Totally.
and I think, okay, no water, no conductor of electricity. Is that valid or no?
It is valid to a point. It will work without it being constantly wet. Most certainly. It will actually, electrolysis produces its own moisture. So factor that in.
So I put
Also, when you organize the molecules in the soil, the ionization, the organization, the structuring, you have a porosity and a soil texture that holds moisture better. I have farmers that come that have been farming in this region, literally like next door to me and down the road for much, 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 much longer than me. And they come and they grab the soil. And these are traditional farmers that use big disc plows and stuff like that. And they come and they grab the soil, they don't recognize it because the porosity, and it'll have just rained like 7 inches. Let's say we get a lot of rain. It's raining today. We get a lot of rain. And the soil will be like wet, but fluffy. It has porosity, but also retains water well. It's because it's structured. It's structured from the electricity.
and part of that is you have a you're not you kind of have a two-part solution. You apply the basalt rock dust to the
With
soil,
compost.
so through the compost. So you have a media that's primed per se to accept the tool, where if you just apply the tool to regular soil, not necessarily as effective.
Um, sure. I mean, that's kind of like saying, like, why wouldn't you do everything that would be in your favor?
Okay.
So, like, like I own a paper pot because it's awesome for a handful of my crops. I don't know what I would do without it at this point. But that doesn't mean that it takes the place of some other stuff or that I
Right.
wouldn't have something else because I have the paper pot that is also effective at its job, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So it's a tool, and you install these systems. After they're installed, there's no maintenance. So, for a farmer, you're like, well, I install this. You're going to use way less inputs. You're going to have all this nitrogen become available. You're going to not have that ammonia locked up in your soil. You're going to, if you want to even get into the deeper levels, you're going to support the industries of death and war less through needing less of those materials. Um, you're going to you're going to structure your soil for better water retention, porosity, and also create a level of moisture with the electrolysis going on in the soil. So that's to speak on dry soil. But yes, moist soil is going to always conduct electricity better, for sure.
Can't find the picture now, but I was looking at one of the ones you installed, and it looks like you dug a trench. You lay the wire into
Uh-huh.
the trench, and around the wire there was some sort of
Magnets.
packet. Okay, yeah. What's going on there?
So those are magnets that are in phase or stacked the same way. Um, thickly coated in beeswax. Those are ring magnets, so they have a hole in the center, little donut magnets. There's 6 of them in the stack, and then they're coated in beeswax thickly just to protect them, basically. And also, the center gets coated and filled with beeswax. So when you slip your ground wire through those magnet stacks through the center, they are around your ground wire in periodicities down the line. There's no exact rule of how often to put them. I put them as often as I can. Like, it's kind of one of those things, like the more the better. So if you have 100-foot ground line, it'd be great if you had 20 on there, but if you had 5 on there, that's awesome too. It's just the more the better, because that's just more electromagnetic induction. That's more magnets interfacing with the conductor hooked to a positive and a negative, which is fluxing. So you're just getting more inducted voltage down your line. And they're just to boost the system.
And it's essentially, and
I'm combining that. That is not from traditional electroculture from the 1800s. Some people call those earth magnets, and they're used for what I'm using them for, but I'm using them on the ground lines with electroculture systems. Just combining things that are all benevolent and harmonious.
so a pretty scalable system, right? Like, because in theory,
Very.
you put in one antenna and you get as much linear length of wire as you need to run.
Yep. Exactly. So depending on your layout, like I've been doing a schematic for a farm up north that has 3 pretty large gardens, 300-400 feet by a couple hundred feet. Luckily 2 of them are oriented north to south, so they can use way fewer antenna heads on these north to south, where the north and south length is the long ways, than they will on the one garden that runs east to west. They'll need more antenna heads to cover that space because the lines are all run south to north. So there's those variables. You can get lucky, and realize that, man, I have this huge space, but I only need like 3 or 4 antennas to cover it all because it's all running long ways south to north. Or you can realize, like, all my original gardens were created without this in mind. So some of them are like perfectly lined up, and then some of them have diagonal lines going through greenhouses. It's whatever needs to be in line with the current. That's what's important. That's what's effective. Better to have fewer lines run properly, fewer antennas run properly, than to have a bunch of them not set up properly.
So say you had a bed block that's 100 feet wide, and let's say it's perfect north-south orientation, length doesn't matter. It sounds like, so how, what's the distance between lines across that
5
100 foot?
antennas you would want on 100 feet,
So you
basically
make it
20 feet,
20 feet apart.
20 feet apart, a 20-foot swath, and that will capacitate wider with time. Um, and over time, like even in all the original books about electroculture, it says, like in Crystal Flu's book, he has a whole couple pages of kind of just notes, you know, random things to keep aware. Like make sure your brass pointers face exactly magnetic south. That's the most critical thing about the function of the telluric collection, because then you're in line with that current. The magnets behind that brass rod are in that same phase, so they're drawing in that same energy flow. That's one note. Another note is that when you install your system, you should give it, like, let's say, 1 season to capacitate that energy into the soil. Although I do see that at least in our area where we do have plenty of moisture, and I'll add that back in as a possible addendum and a possible reason for this, but they seem to capacitate and work very quickly. We've been planting the same shishito pepper variety, had been planting it for like 8 years, pretty good yields. They sell really well. Um, I've just been adding and adding these lines on my own farm as I can over the years, more and more and more. But you have to wait till you have empty spots. You got to wait till you're in between crops here. I bought a trenching chainsaw so I can install lines in like 1.5 inch wide trenches between crops when I want to. Just because I'm trying to do this on a scale and be able to install for other people if possible and stuff like that. Um,
What's the
however, go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead. You got it.
Oh no, I'm sorry. You go ahead, Diego.
I say, what's the rough cost if somebody wanted to do this on an acre, and let's say everything was lined up perfectly?
An acre? Um, that's kind of hard for me to say as far as an acre and how much of that is what that is in like what is an acre in like a square foot?
It's
That's not something I should probably know, but I don't know.
doing math on the fly.
It
Like
would,
200 by 200 about.
200 bucks. So you'd have 200 feet. So that would be 10 antennas. If you're using you'd use the CW1 antennas for this type of application. The other models, they're all kind of interchangeable, but they all have specificities and particular uses that they're designed for. Um, but yeah, you would need 10 antennas. So that would be about $3,000 for the antennas. And then you would need enough ground line, which is a nominal at that point, like probably a couple $100 in wire.
Is that just like off the roll Home Depot wire?
Yeah, like I mean tractor supply type places.
Just
I'm
wire,
not a
wire,
real
like normal
it's
wire.
I'll tell you exactly what it is. It's 12 and a half gauge galvanized steel, not aluminized. You're gonna find that a lot. And they usually keep it like if you go to like a tractor supply type store, that galvanized wire is going to be outside. What you're going to find inside is typically smaller rolls of galvanized at smaller gauges and aluminized wire at 12 and a half, because that's what they use for like dog fences and stuff.
Mm.
So, and it's way more expensive. The galvanized steel is a zinc coated wire. That's what galvanized is. So that's good. Galvanized steel, yeah, 12 and a half gauge is traditional ground line. That's what Justin Crystal Flew used. That's what I used. That's what most people in electroculture use. You don't have to use that. You could use something a little smaller, definitely thicker. Um, but that's the rule of thumb. That's the wire we use traditionally.
What?
And it is inexpensive.
So if you look at these, they're kind of works of art. I mean, not kind of. They are works of art. I think
Oh,
they're
thank you.
really unique, cool things just to look at. They have a steampunk look. They look like something
Yeah,
that came out of
yeah,
the 1890s, right?
sure.
How much of these and the materials that go into them are material limitations due to when this was originally done? So if I made something in 1890, right, I had to use stuff that was around in 1890. I wasn't using a circuit board
Yeah,
or injection molded plastic because that wasn't even on the table.
yep.
So how does that play into it?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one I've never really been asked. So the brass is essential for the collection of that current. It's an extremely good conductor, and especially of telluric current. And Crystal Flew wrote about this extensively. The brass is important on the telluric rod. Um, I wouldn't know another metal that I would want to use for that. Circuit board wise, there are some devices that have been built in the world of electroculture that utilize more like plastic molded circuitry, and they're not really antennas. They're more like things you plug in or DC powered little units for house plants, or they're not really agricultural, although they're very neat, like they're very cool. Like I just mean they're not really something a farmer might be able to apply as far as I see, but that may be just something I'm not seeing. I'm not trying to speak for anyone else's equipment really. Um,
What's this?
However, go
Oh,
ahead.
and
The
sorry to
copper
interrupt.
is paramagnetic.
Okay.
Copper is paramagnetic. We want to use copper wherever possible. Copper is the divine metal to work with. I mean, on all levels. Um, you know, the story on copper from like this, I guess I would say kind of the mainstream scientific world, is that it's created through the explosion of stars, and it's a very cosmic metal, has a paramagnetic energy, which we do call like a cosmic energy in biodynamics. That's why we add the basalt, which is paramagnetic. My antennas are also core filled with paramagnetic basalt. The original antennas from France were a magnetic core, a magnetic base, like just an actual magnet. I've chosen to use paramagnetic basalt core filling because raw basalt is like the only rock, or one of the only rocks, that's highly capacitory, has a high capacitance in its raw form. So it can turn the unit into a basalt battery, essentially. It capacitates the energy that isn't directly being taken.
How how different are the ones in China now? Like, so you're saying, hey,
Oh,
there's some type
we're talking about big like AC or DC power, I guess, like big generator powered systems.
more, we're
Like
not
I'm talking about
harvesting
like,
it, we're forcing
yeah,
powering.
yeah. And they're blasting little bolt. Like you couldn't run like a 110 current on your garden for more than a couple hours. It might be beneficial for like short periods of, it would be beneficial for short periods of time, but if you just let that run, it would be too much. It would kill your crops. So the feeble voltage all the time from free energy is what I'm advocating, from electromagnetic energy. What China's doing is like a very Frankenstein industrial version. I was just pointing out the fact that you can go see that the all the reports from all the World Economic Forum and all that are basically just are verbatim saying how insane the yields are, how insane the productivity is. At the same time, you'll see a little bubble pop up that's kind of trying to be, I won't even use the term skeptic, just reductionist. And, you know, but you also have a lot of issues out here with misinformation on electroculture. So I don't even blame people for being skeptics, because mostly what you're seeing is people wrapping craft wire on sticks from the yard.
What's the difference between that? So I take your antenna and I wrap wire around. Is that a case
Well,
of um
my antenna it's connected to a ground wire.
okay, but there's two things it could be. And now
Mm-hmm.
if I so if you're, let's just say yours is 10 out of 10, best of best, and 0 out of 10 is I'm doing nothing. Is wrapping wire around a stick like a 2 out of 10? Hey, it's better than nothing, or is it more equivalent to like you might as well not even do it?
Man, out of love for humanity, I'll give it a 2 out of 10.
All right, there we go.
I don't want to make people like, I don't want to be a person saying don't or no. That's not what I'm trying to do by pointing this out. It's just to say that the amazing realities of electroculture far surpass the fantastical simplicity that's being pushed. Like far. So like if you think what's happening with your wrap stick is cool, then man oh man, try this is what I'm saying. Like honestly, with the electrical science of it, I mean, wood is conductive when it's wet, so it's just going to ground right out to that point. That's, you know, where it's stuck in the ground to that little spot. Boom, boom. If it's doing anything, which that copper could be collecting a little something, but I do see people pulling them out from underneath the plants, which then would not, because you would be blocking that collection for the most part. Because this is from the solar winds. It's a cosmic energy from the sun. That's the positive.
What I mean, I have so many questions I'm stacking up in my head here. All right. One of the experiments you did, you put one of your antenna in a compost pile. Before we get to how that worked, what if I just
It's a
take,
model I make that goes in a compost pile.
okay, a
Yeah,
compost pile model? What if I just take
CW3. Yeah.
steel pry bar, shove it into my compost pile? Am I getting some beneficial effect, do you think?
With the steel, with the iron, I would say no, because iron demagnetizes soil.
What
And
about a
part of the reason
copper
we
pipe?
copper pipe, if it's coming up out of the ground for a distance, you might be harnessing a little effect if it's reaching the ground and going through the pile
Okay.
and making contact with the ground. You need a ground.
Right. So I cut you
And
off.
that
Sorry.
pile
Why?
would basically become a ground too, but the more ground, the better. Deep in the earth is a good ground. in a compost pile above the surface is not a good of a ground is good of a ground in electrical science.
Why not iron?
Well, iron over time, all these steel and iron implements that have been used in agriculture actually demagnetizing the soil and making it less inclined to magnetism, which is less paramagnetic, more diamagnetic. Therefore, it doesn't have the cation exchange capacitance that it once did, because the soil naturally exchanges electricity with the atmosphere. This we know. I mean, this we know. So when the soil is at a higher paramagnetic level altogether, it's drawing more of that in on its own. The antennas are like a mega booster of that. And then you're running that wire into the rhizome layer. So you're getting some deeper effect with that by far. But part of building the highly capacitory soil with high capacitance rather, is that it's going to interface with the atmosphere on its own to a level too. And that's what Phil Callahan wrote a lot about in his book, Paramagnetism. Great book if you're into that field.
Yeah. Is this, I don't know if you ever read the book. There's a book like titled something like Irish Round Towers. Is that
Yeah,
essentially
that's
what,
Phil Callahan.
is that
Same
essentially
guy.
what these were?
Yeah, those were
Electromagnetic
basalt
collectors?
towers. Those are
Yeah.
basalt towers, right? So those were paramagnetic rocks. Now, interestingly enough, the science of paramagnetics, um, when you combine diamagnetic rocks in rings and stacks, they have the potential to become paramagnetic. This definitely is in the realm of elemental transmutation. Like Rudolf Steiner called those things spiritual digestion in the soil, what I'm speaking of, the transmutation of elements. That's where the word alchemy comes from, from the word alchemit, and it's referring to the soils of the Nile Delta that would transmutate elements and how dark and rich it was. And that's where the word comes from. It's an agricultural word meaning the flux of elements, polarities.
And for people listening to this, I'm going back in memory here. But so in Irish Round Tower, the whole idea about it was you had these strange towers across the Irish countryside
Mhm.
that seemingly had no purpose. That wasn't like a lighthouse. It's not to protect from invaders
Not a
or hide.
silo. Yeah.
Yeah, and like why are these things here? And the rough theory was like you could fill them to different levels with some material. I forget what that was. And that could essentially tune them to a
Yes.
frequency to get the benefit of something like we're talking about
Salt.
today.
Yeah. Or a paramagnetic rock. Other rocks too. Other rocks other than basalt are most certainly paramagnetic. That's just the one we use the most.
Was
Yes, that's exactly right. That's Phil Callahan's book. I'm almost certain that was his book. He definitely wrote about these Irish round towers a lot, and that's the theory that they were used to harness paramagnetic energy. They're basically a large rock antenna.
was Electroculture in The Secret Life of Plants, the movie or the book?
I don't know. I did not see or read that.
Okay.
I don't know.
Because
I would
that's one
imagine
thing.
it. You would think it would be.
I mean, they had a lot of stuff in their radio frequency, and I think round towers might have been mentioned in there. I'm pretty sure Phil Callahan's work was talked about in there. That's
Okay.
what thing that kind of got me interested in some of this stuff, like going back to like 2005. There's the book who was written in 1973. There's a
Yeah.
movie 1979, something like that. So if somebody wants a entertaining introduction to some of this stuff, that's one place to look.
Yes. And Harvey Lyle wrote some good books for this too.
Okay. So we got some
Enlivened
name.
rock powders.
Yeah, I think I've read that one or
Good
had that one
book.
around
Yeah,
here.
good book.
The experiment you did putting it into a compost pile, how do you think that worked?
Well, it works well. I mean, it's the same theory. So that model that I make is specifically designed to connect to a copper grounding rod, which goes through a compost pile or windrow and then contacts the ground for its negative point. And that's just a way to use that same principle to go ahead and enliven your compost. So for instance, if you take basalt rock, which is dark gray, and you put it in the compost, you'll notice that naturally after maybe 2 months or so that you'll see white rock there because it's turned to nascent lime. It's an electrically charged, newly birthed, nascent lime. That's a very powerful material. That's doing what people use lime to do, but on a much more efficient level, because this is flux polarities and become an enlivened rock powder, not an inert rock powder that you might buy in a bag. It's the difference between fresh food and highly processed food. We know they have different values of energy, like anything. So when you add the antenna, you just get much quicker transmutation. So you might see that powder turn from gray to white in like 3 weeks. And that's the experimental nature, perhaps, of the observation. But what I'm doing in that case of that video is just applying the principles of electroculture to my compost pile so that it's a very active pile as I apply it to the soil. We're just going to go ahead and start enlivening this compost that we're adding to the soil so that it's doing its job even more efficiently. And that model I created, the CW3, for that exact purpose. So you could keep an antenna in your compost pile. And since it's not mounted high, like at 25 feet in the troposphere, there's not nearly as many like free electrons or free ions. So I have two tensor rods coming out, one counterclockwise, one clockwise for balance. They are the same length exactly of one sacred cubit, and one looks smaller than the other because it's set down into the body slightly more, but they're the same length. And those two rods are creating piezoelectric current into the ground, into the wire that connects to the ground rod, instead of the atmospheric bundle, which would be more for a pole mounted higher up mount. So we're just trading out different forms of electricity, and copper being a great material to use for piezoelectric current. Tensor rods, the technology of Slim Sperling, who was an Appalachian fellow, Light Life Technologies, and tensor rods was his whole line of work. You can go read about it. Slim Sperling, great individual.
Why 25 feet up for the antenna? Is there anything special about that number?
That's just about where you start interacting with the troposphere, and there's more free electrons and ions to collect there because they're not grounding out with the Earth's negative. When you get close to around 15 feet, that attraction is high and they start grounding out, especially if your ground is very paramagnetic, which is great in your gardens, but we're just collecting that into a unit that's going to send them, current goes from positive to negative. So collecting the positive, it's going to flow to the negative, and that's going to flux back and forth and induce the voltage. And that principle, I keep bringing it up, but it's so important because that's how all life works. Literally.
So if you have a 2-story house, you can put it on the roof and you're pretty close.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, you could put it on a roof as long as you can run that wire down through insulators and stuff like that, not making contact with wood or metal, and or insulate your wire to the point of the ground is fine too. Using insulated wire is an option.
One other thing I spent way too much time on was reading about Victor Schauberger.
Okay. Yep.
And all the stuff he did with water.
Mm-hmm.
The great thing about water is you can distribute it widely and easily. Could you use one of these antennas to, I don't know the word, impregnate the water?
Already have that set up.
Okay.
Yes, we already have that design set up. I've been working with water for a long time. If you look at my Instagram, for about 8 or 9 years, I don't make them so much anymore because I've been very dedicated to electroculture. I still do make them for people when they want them, but I've been making pulse crystal devices, based on the work of like Don Croft. They call them sucker punches, just pulse crystal, PEMF crystal devices, putting pressure on quartz and then wrapping them with magnet wire in a Mobius coil that connects to a frequency generator. I also make water imprinting devices that I've been making for many, many years, way before I even made my first electroculture antenna, that imprints frequencies into a mirror and glass bottle of water for like drinking purposes, right? This is radionics medicine, which is a big field. I operate a Spooky 2 and do a lot of radionic stuff as well. With agriculture too, induction of elemental frequencies of like nitrogen, 1014 hertz, that's nitrogen. That's why on the CW4 house plant model, it has 2 leads for alligator connections to a frequency generator. But back to your question, yes, I have a schematic and a design that I use that uses these antennas. It runs through your water reservoir, and then it grounds on the other side of the reservoir. So it runs that current through the water the same way, energizing it with telluric and atmospheric energy. Exactly right. And it structures the water as well. So
One
again, we have a lot of benefit there.
one of the devices you have, I'll just read your caption on IG so you know what it is.
Okay.
It's an Electroculture ground antenna, 1/4 cubit model featuring double Lakovsky coils, voltic biothermal and core filled with Paramagnetic rock. So,
Yes.
for people who are listening, not watching, you have an antenna in the ground next to what appears to be a woody plant, and there are two C shaped, more than semicircles, almost closed circles of like a braided copper wire, one above the other, and in those are wrapping around the main trunk of said woody plant. What's going on here?
So that yeah, that's a custom model I made for someone. That's not a model that I may do still make. I make custom antennas. So if anybody wants anything like that, I definitely love to make them. I do incorporate in a lot of custom models, tensor technology and Lakovsky rings. I also make a Lakovsky ring device for trees that goes on a wooden stake. So Lakovsky, George Lakovsky used these rings to heal plants. A lot of the technology was kind of discovered by Thomas Galen Hieronymus, who did a lot of radionics work and worked with Tesla, but he also did a lot of horticulture and noticed that he was using these copper rings to like basically support these plants in his nursery. And he realized that the ones that he had used copper to make these supports with did not have these tumors that started growing on all these other identical plants. So him being a very bright man saw that there was something to that and basically started utilizing these copper rings to heal plants. And he got rid of the tumors on the other plants by changing out the steel for copper. Lakovsky took this work much further, tons of work. George Lakovsky, the Lakovsky coil healing device that you sit between. A lot of people have seen those where it's generating fields from both sides. But he is known for these coils, and these coils are named after him. And yes, they're an open ring, traditionally at 30 centimeters, that have an opening that will face magnetic north. And these are used as healing rings in agriculture, and people use them for themselves as well. And they're kind of doing a very similar work to the telluric collectors. It's because that opening is faced north. It may in theory sound like it's the opposite, but that's just so that the other part faces south and it can collect and then come to that point. It's a very traditional energy tool, the Lakovsky ring. And the antenna you're looking at was one that was requested where I put two Lakovsky rings for the customer in the device. So that's what that is. What it does, it's kind of a long explanation, but if you check out the work of George Lakovsky, you can read upon it, in abundance. Like his work is amazing.
The theory is that whatever's inside that ring benefits
It's
from
getting the field. Exactly. Yes, exactly right. That's
which
why it's going around the stem. And I use this in tandem with a paramagnetic rock paste that I make that I will paint on the stem of like a small tree or a large tree or a tree in general. And that's kind of acting like a paintable antenna
is that like
because it's
healthier growth, faster growth?
a lot of times this is used to restore or revitalize trees that aren't doing so well. So it's a way to apply that paramagnetic rock right to its trunk and harness some of those energies right to its trunk. That's kind of made popular by Peter Escher and Harvey Lyle back in the 50s originally, and then in the 80s by Harvey Lyle, biodynamic tree pastes. And I use those rings to go around where the paste is as an invigorator or an energizer for the paste. So it's just kind of some harmonious technologies. But you can see that all my four standard antenna models don't include that. That's kind of just I have some custom models that I've made for people where they want tensor rings that are wired into the main wire because The tensor ring will have 177 millihertz vibration. They want that going into their device. Then you do get into more of the energy, vibrational, oscillatory medicine, and what we might call metaphysical aspect of it. But tensor fields are no more metaphysical than how refrigerators work, you know. And people accept that technology. You know, people will accept a thermocouple on an oven, but then they look at it on an electroculture antenna, and all of a sudden they're skeptical about thermocouples. But it's like, well, these are on like all our devices that we use. They produce voltage to switch on or switch off things, you know. So we're just taking that voltage and putting it in the ground.
Long lived
So,
trees like oak trees,
yes.
some of the redwoods, they're operating up in this troposphere just because they're tall. Some of these things are living 1,000 years old. Is there any is there any resemblance to something unique to trees that has this kind of paramagnetic ability? Is there where they can collect some of this?
Trees are our first antennas. Trees are the primary antennas. Your farm, your gardens, you want trees all around. These barren landscapes, these barren farms, these mega farms, part of the reason, I won't even say part, one of the cardinal reasons they fail is lack of trees. Trees are our first antennas. When I'm putting up antennas, I'm not going to put one right up against a tree. The tree's already doing that work there. You know, bless you, tree. I'm going to move my antenna over there where there's no trees. Um, Trees are doing the first work, most certainly. The more trees around your gardens, I realize there's issues with shade and stuff like that, but the more trees you can have and still have light and still have space, the better. Trees are our first antennas, and I will always say that. Like, there's nothing I can make that can top. Like, I get comments like, "Let nature do the work." Okay, well, you're on an iPhone right now. Why didn't you walk here and tell me that? It's because you're using something that has been innovated to make a function simpler, right? So trees are the first boss. Like, nothing I can make can replicate or even come close to the amazing beauty that nature, you know, our earthly mother and our heavenly father can make between the two. Between that copulation, nothing can be topped. But all we can do is use the materials we are given and the information we do gather to do our best to emulate that.
I think part of the reason people are skeptical of this stuff, be it rock powders, holistic medicine, whatever, is they expect a, and this is not holistic, but like a steroid reaction, right? I take steroids, I will see visible results very quickly. I will 100% know that there's a cause and effect.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think some of the issue with these things, and even going down to things that aren't necessarily is pushing into this realm of like biochar, is there isn't a I do it and I see the results. Like we're just not calibrated like with our observation systems. I know you've seen great results, so we'll get to this.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But like we can't see, obviously a light green leaf is going to look different than a dark green leaf, but we can't see some of the things that insects could see or
Mm-hmm.
sense those things. So people try this stuff and they can't, like, I don't see anything different. Is it
Yeah.
working? And they say, well, if I can't see it with my eyes, it's not working. It was a waste.
Mm-hmm.
What, and I know you had great results, and I don't want to over promise people because I think
Of
that
course.
can set them up for extreme disappointment. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where, again, where some of this stuff gets like snake oil salesmen from the late 1800s. I'm not saying this is that at all,
Sure.
but hey, like, Joe, drink this and it cures, everything,
Mm-hmm.
gonorrhea, alcoholism, you name it.
Because
And
that's
then,
not what I'm suggesting.
no, I know that. And I'm
No, no,
not
no. I
saying,
mean, what I'm suggesting is not was not easy. It requires effort.
and, and I think, so if somebody puts this in and you're a
Mm-hmm.
gardener or market farmer, and what are realistic, reasonable results that you can expect?
staggering yields, unbelievable results. Expect that. That's what you should expect. If you want me to play it down, I will out of safety and say, expect what you put in. You're not going to install the systems and not do your other work. Most people have cut themselves off from the ability to receive information. Number one, because we've been primed for that through desensitization. We've been sold really easy, quick versions of what actually takes a little work up front to really reap the result from. You know, you go put a bunch of sticks wrapped with craft wire in the ground, you're not going to see too many results. If you do, it's because you spent more time out there messing with them because you were out there looking at those sticks, or you just did other benevolent things, or it's a combination of effects. And that's what we're usually dealing with any success. But we're talking about a level of trust that really goes into divine trust. And like in Qigong medicine, like my main protocol is a lot of spleen work with people because I think the main disease in the world is lack of divine trust. And when you don't trust the divine order of the world, you don't trust yourself, and you certainly don't trust anyone else. And when things take a lot of effort or physical labor, or even at this point, a pretty minimal amount of physical labor, or it devalidates your previous paradigm of thought, and that's part of your identity, then get out of here. People aren't denying it because it doesn't work. They're denying it because they don't want to change their paradigm of thought because they think it invalidates their past. But doesn't. It just enriches their future.
Yeah, and I appreciate the work you're doing, and don't take this the wrong
Oh,
way
I don't
because
take it at all.
no, what I'm going to say, because I think people could say this, because part of me could say like, "Hey, this guy's insane," and I think people listening to that could say that, and they could say that about me. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying casting
Yeah.
a stone from some glass house. And then part of me is like, "Hey, we need more people like you to expand and build upon knowledge." And if we don't have the using quotation marks insane thinkers, out
Mhm.
of the box thinkers who push the limits, that challenges how we identify with our past,
Mhm.
we don't make progress. And I think too much change and focus on like pushing is like, well, let's make the next device for a consumer or something like that, right? Like that's where it's all fine if you want to go invent AI, right? Like that's cool. But if you want to push the limits of electroculture, it's like, well, that's quack,
Oh,
right?
you're a wild man. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm proud to be called insane if the sane is the other option
But yeah, I
of
think it's
stagnance.
important, right? Yeah, you have to
Yeah.
have.
Agricultural sustainability. Sustainable agriculture includes sustaining the expansive interest in the mind of the agriculturalist. We're dealing with static agriculture out here, even amongst the young farmers. Even down to silly stuff. Like I noticed, like they think they have to wear canvas and muck boots. No, you can wear linen, you can wear slippers. It's all good. It's all love. There's a lot of stuff that's expected of us, even from our customers. When you show up and you're not, you know, people want a dumb farmer. People want a farmer that knows how to grow a crop and how to go to church, and that's about it. People want a pretty dumbed down experience. Not everybody, but they want a certain cliche from you. They don't want you to have ideas that challenge them. They don't want to hear that usually because that's just a general condition of trauma. We're dealing with trauma and it just extends into our agricultural world so deeply. And another thing I'll say is like one of my favorite quotes by Louis Farrakhan is don't let those with inferior work take a superior position. So you come show me a system that's amazing and I'll drop mine today because that's how willing I am to do away with and burn the things that I see as not working. But solutionary measures, you come show me one that's better, I'll be on your team. I'll drop my stuff.
Well, this is a soil podcast, but we'll dabble a little bit into the life talk, which I always enjoy to do. For someone who's poured as much time into something as you have, how do you stay true to the path when you don't know where it's going to lead, when other people say, "Hey, you're crazy," And when it's so far out of the norm, like how do you have the courage or resiliency within yourself to do this? Because I mean, you look at this here, right? Reading books from the 1700s, manufacturing stuff out of paramagnetic rock and brass. You don't have like a device you can plug in and say, okay, like I achieved like this on a meter, so I got a result. And it's years of work and sorting through this and looking for the knowledge. And if everybody did that with just something that they enjoyed in life, I think the world would be so much of a better place. But people don't want to get past the first search page in Google.
Sure.
How do you keep going?
Man, I didn't do this for anyone else. I would be happy to just, I often say, like, I'm fulfilling my dharma. I want to share this. This is part of, staying true to the path. I mean, in the Tao, the only true path is the nameless path. So to not give a label to your path, I think is the most important. To always live by your truth is important at every moment, small or large. Um, I don't mean that in a selfish way, not at the expense or the cost of others, not in some way like that. But staying true to my path, it hasn't been difficult for me. I'll be honest. It's not a difficult thing. It's difficult for me to diverge from that path. That's what's difficult. That's what I find challenging. Um, I have a deep love for what I am trying to promote. I feel like it's definitely part of the coalescence of many lifetimes, and I'm here to do it. So I'm not scared in the least bit. I have no concern with what other people may think of me at the end of the day, because honestly, I've been talking with people all over the world who are just so super stoked on this stuff. And if anything, that's enough. I mean, gosh. But at the end of the day, I'm happy just to know it and do it myself. I mean, I guess if we lived in a world where we didn't need to make an income at all, you know, I would be so satisfied just showing the people that I came across this stuff and those who are interested. And, you know, that's it. I, it's not difficult, I guess, is my answer for me to stay on this path. I mean, I've lived a life of inconvenience for others and path choices that many others question. So it feels like I was well practiced, I guess.
How far down the
Yeah.
path do you think you are of figuring this out? Do you think you have a
I hope
pretty
not far.
you think there's a lot more?
There's always a lot more. I think the day you call yourself a master is the day you know you don't know anything. And if you say it with ego, you know next to nothing. So I don't want to think that I know anything.
But I'll push back a
It's,
little bit and say, relative to the general populace, you're
I've
you're
practiced it.
you're a PhD in this versus the general people. And I'm not saying you know everything. Like we'll never know everything.
Right.
And I've talked to people on the podcast that have studied soil for 40 years and they don't know all the answers.
Yeah. Quantum physicists can't really tell you what potential is or energy. They
Yeah.
can quantify it, but they can't tell you what it is. It's like the difference between what something is and what it's made of is so important. The sun, sure, made of gases, but that's not what the sun is. It's our benevolent life. So, in my opinion, not preaching dogma, just saying that's one example. Or when people say a rattlesnake strikes at the carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide or whatever, well, it strikes at fear that's represented or manifested as that gas. So, energy and motion is emotions, and we put forth elements that represent those emotions. So, what it is and what it's made of are not the same thing, ever, almost.
But let's say in terms of application, like there, I'm sure like if people did this for another 200 years, right? By definition, they're going to know more than you know today.
I hope so. Yeah.
But do you think you at this point, like, hey, I've done enough work to say I have a solid fundamental understanding of this? Not everything, but I
Yes.
know like, hey, how most of it works. I know the results that the average person could probably expect. And like, do you feel like you're at that level, or do you
Very
think
confident, very confident at that level, beyond confident at that level, not with ego, but simply because I've been doing it for some time. I've been watching it. I understand it. It's rolled around in my brain for many, 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 many years. I've applied it and applied it and applied it and not applied it and applied it and applied it and not applied it. I've had controls again and again and again. I've grown the same crops in the same plots of soil for almost 12 years. I know the difference. Farmers are going to know the difference. And it's not just a little bit of difference. We're talking about like, man, we live in one of the most pest ridden like farming environments in the country right here. We have had almost no pests, man. It's the reason I want to share this is because this work is hard and we need these systems to move forward so that farmers can expand themselves and not just like we need to be able to be expansive, not be lean farms. We need to be expansive farms, not like an auto factory, like a beautiful divine interface where we're utilizing benevolent technology, not technology that does us harm. We need to delineate between those things. We need to be distinguishable and distinguish between the things that do us harm and the things that are benevolent to us, you know. And also, I think just like agriculture has a lot of dogmas and stuff attached to it and stigmas, and none of them almost apply to myself, but I find myself confronted with these constantly. Paradigms that people want you to fit in as an agriculturalist. But those paradigms don't really foster good agriculture. And they support the industries ultimately that are against our success and are actually promoting that we fail to make money, like the USDA.
for people, I'll call you an expert on it, and this is not to pad your ego, but I love from that level of experience and knowledge, I think you're at that level. What what ideas do you have of stuff you want to try? Because that's where I think things get really juicy and interesting. Somebody who's done stuff for a long time, they've hey, I got a good understanding of this. I've practiced it. Now I want to iterate. Where do you think this could go?
Okay, that's a really fun question. I'm developing definitely more models of antennas for different uses, mushroom growing operations, all sorts of things that we already know produces high flowering rates in mushrooms. I mean, electronic induction of current. They've done it with like DC systems and stuff, but I'm making my version that will utilize single antennas for multiple lines of logs, let's say like for shiitake production in the woods. Okay, so there's kind of like immediate stuff like that, like more models and stuff. On a larger scale, what I really, really, truly want to do is help get these systems to places where I don't feel, where I know that the agricultural conditions are so pressing. Like for instance, where I spent a lot of time in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, in Treasure Beach area, all the agriculturalists, besides the mountain growers and different things, all the farms are mostly in some pretty centralized areas where the weather is more favorable. There's places in the world that I would like to get this equipment. I would like to do projects like that, trying to get these set up on larger levels. You can scale this equipment down to the tiny little box garden if you want, and it's going to work great. But I really have designed these systems with the hope, especially my main antenna models, with the hopes of seeing these installed large scale. Um, so I'm working with some people right now doing some design for some pretty large scale installations that if everything goes well, I hope they go through with,
That's awesome.
just trying to give them the raw data, the realism, the what it's going to take you, what it's going to be. Once it's done, it's in. There's very few systems like that in agriculture. Once the investment made, once it's in.
I mean, do you think farmers, like a lot of business owners, they want to know something is gonna give them some results.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I've always tried to encourage you, hey, start small. You can
Yeah.
dabble in something, whether it's starting a new business, adding microgreens to your farm, or growing a new crop. Like, plant a little bit of it, see how it goes, and then if it works, go from there. Is this something that's as simple as, put in one antenna, one rod? Because if you were saying, hey, an acre, you're about 3 grand. So if you go down to one, say, smaller bed block, you're at, less than $500. And
Oh
that's,
yeah.
yeah, not a
Yeah.
huge investment for a lot of people. And then you try that one bed. Do I notice a difference? And then if it works, you stack on from there.
That's exactly what I did. That's exactly what I did. So that's what I mean, I tell people that I'm not trying to sell people a billion antennas at once. I'm making these to order while doing farm work. I mean, I would love to get to that point where I'm so inundated with antenna orders. Sure, I love that work. I really do. But yes, start with one. Like I said, infinite distance south to north. So if you're laid out like that, I mean, you can cover a lot of space. If you're not, it is what it is. But yeah, you can start with one antenna that's 299 and a however long roll of wire you need and a coupler. And that's it. And you can install it in a pole, whatever you want to use. You can use a sectional flagpole. Some people want to use a wooden mast and then they connect another pole to it. And I've seen it all. Sectional flagpoles are very easy to put up and coming in sections. People can transport them easily and then stack them up. And you can install the antenna head on the top piece ahead of time. There's lots of ease in that. They're lightweight, but yes, one antenna, one line, and you will see that. That's what I'm telling you. Try it out. That's the only way anybody knows anything. And even then, you only know what you see and you only know what you understand. It's like the speed of light is really the speed of perception. Light doesn't even travel, it self-replicates, so it doesn't even make sense. But anyway, like, you have to go see, try it out. That's the only thing I could say to someone skeptical but feeling inclined is like, that's a pretty small relative investment for anything agricultural. I mean, any agricultural tool. I mean, under $300. And
Absolutely.
you think it might could get you $300 or by far, if you're growing a crop for sale, I mean, that would be no sweat to recoup that investment with one line in over 1 year. I mean, that's not over one season with one crop. That's what I'm
It's
trying to get at.
it's in the category of worth a shot.
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, basically it's kind of like proofs in the pudding. So go for it if you feel inclined. If you don't, that's fine. Uh, do as much research as you can, I would say, before you make that decision, and know the difference between kind of the misinformation and the real, and the real deal that has a lot of information and time tested results behind it. And also just, I try to share a lot of results from my own farm because, like I said, that's still what we do for a living. I mean, that's what we do all day every day is farm. So I'm still in that place. I'm still farming for a living. That's what we do. I could not afford to do these systems and if they didn't produce such amazing results. Like, literally, we're planting a third or half as less every year of the same things and getting like more and more. And I just want others to experience that. Why not? If the whole scarcity mentality, is not a healthy thing. Like, this is an abundance mentality solutionary tool that really works. So when people talk about those things, I suggest this method of solution. You know, Try it out, see for yourself. That's all I can say at the end of the day. That's all I can offer. You know,
Where's your best source for basalt rock dust for people who want to get it in quantity?
Usually that's going to be kind of a localized thing to each individual because of shipping. Vermont, the state of Vermont produces a lot of basalt. So I would look for distributors out of Vermont, perhaps. But you can also use other types of paramagnetic rock. So, like, the geology of your specific area is what you should. This is what I tell people because I get this question a lot, and people are all over different areas of the U.S. and the world. And I say that look for a paramagnetic rock in your area. So, interestingly enough, if you live near a river, you're going to find that, like in Chinese medicine, you have the concept of the river being kind of the life body, and you have either side of the banks either bank being the yin bank and the yang bank. And the yin bank is always depicted as shady and dark, and the yang bank always sunny and bright. And this is because the yang bank of a river is paramagnetic rock, and the yin bank of the river is diamagnetic rock. And you will find this again and again. Willamette Valley, the river runs through. One side is granite, the other side is dolomite. Egypt and the Nile, you have the same thing. Mississippi River Valley, the other Nile, you have that going on. You have this going on pretty much in every major body of water. Likewise, in traditional Japanese Zen gardens, you'll have the turtle rock and the crane rock. And there's a crane rock that's represented the sky energy that's paramagnetic. It'll be a paramagnetic rock, granite or basalt usually. Then you have on the other side, conversely, the diamagnetic rock, the turtle rock, which is a diamagnetic rock, usually a limestone or a gypsum based rock. So you have these concepts of these polarities fluxing energy between them. And this is so that between those two rocks in that garden, those energies are fluxing between them just from the raw rock material. They're usually very large rocks. And then they're placed in perspective conditions, like the yang rock would be placed higher than the yin rock because that's a yang position to yin. They're all relative positions. Yin and yang is all relative to one another, to something else. Like, for instance, in a home that's 2 stories, the floor of the first level is yin to the ceiling, but the ceiling of the first story is yin to the floor of the second level because it's underneath it. So these are levels of relativity, and it really is in line with even Einstein's theory of relativity.
It's totally fascinating, all this stuff. And I really want to thank you for coming on and sharing
Thank
what you're
you.
doing, putting the work in over time. For people that want to follow along with you, they can check you out on Instagram at The Fertile Current. Your website's thefertilecurrent.com. Any closing thoughts you just want to leave people with regarding electroculture?
Well, I just want to say that these systems work as all life circuitry does. It's the positive, it's the negative, it's the fire and the water. And between the two, like I said, you have the steam, you have the energy. And these systems are the same way you would heal a body, is how you heal soil, how you produce energy, how you produce an enlivened human being, is how you produce enlivened soil. Again, there's no difference. We're all one, we're all the same. So our cells work the same. We're all electromagnetic. Our hearts communicate. You know, I don't have anything prepared to say, but much love to everyone. And if anyone's interested in following along with an insane electroculturalist, I invite you on the journey with me, for sure. You're much invited.
Thanks a
And
lot,
yes,
Chris.
thefertilecurrent.com, you can see all our products and all of our stuff and a lot of information. Thank you, Diego. I really appreciate you having me on and taking the time.